Is Donald Trump going to heaven? Well, that seems to be a question that Donald Trump himself is asking. He suggested this week that if he manages to broker a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, that somehow that might improve his chances of getting there.
I want to try and get to heaven if possible. I'm hearing I'm not doing well.
Now, there's a lot we could say in response to that. One is perhaps to point out that at least in this area, he's potentially showing a modicum of humility and being willing to admit there is at least one thing in life that he's not so good at. But it also suggests that he's misunderstood how someone gets to heaven in the first place. Now, the reality is there are many people around the world today and through history who have done the same. There was a guy in the Gospels who was a bit like Donald Trump. He was wealthy and powerful, although unlike Donald Trump at the age of 79, this guy was actually quite young. And he came to Jesus and asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" In other words, how can I be good enough to get to heaven? And Jesus' response is to ask a question. He says, "Why do you call me good?" And then he goes on to say that no one is good except God alone. In other words, the only person who is good enough for heaven is God, and our application to join the Godhead has just been revoked. None of us are good enough, but that is why Jesus came. Not to set us a list of rules that we need to follow, but ultimately to live the life we should have lived, and then die the death that we should have died. The way to heaven is not through being good enough, but receiving the forgiveness that only Jesus can make available. And that is why heaven will be such a wonderful place. You know, one of the things we often find obnoxious about Donald Trump is that he seems to be so full of himself. He seems to think he's so good at everything. But the first step to becoming a Christian and going to heaven is to recognize that we aren't good enough. We need God's forgiveness, a forgiveness that is freely available because Jesus died on the cross for each one of us. And so heaven will be a wonderful place, not full of people who think they deserve to be there, but those who recognize they don't, and they've received it gratefully as a gift.